Great expectations, even a set of shoes all four round, might not be acceptable as a present, in a total vacancy of hoofs. I don't mean that sort of remembrance, Joe. I don't mean a present. But Joe had got the idea of a present in his head and must harp upon it. Or even, said he, if you was helped to knocking her up a new chain for the front door, or say a gross or two of shark-headed screws for general use, or some light fancy article, such as a toasting fork when she took her muffins, or a gridiron when she took a sprat or such like. I don't mean any present at all, Joe, I interposed. Well, said Joe, still harping on it as though I had particularly pressed it, if I was yourself, Pip, I wouldn't. No, I would not. For what's a door chain when she's got one always up? And shark headers is open to misrepresentations. And if it was a toasting fork, you'd go into brass and do yourself no credit. And the uncommonest workman can't show himself uncommon in a gridiron, for a gridiron is a gridiron, said Joe, steadfastly impressing it upon me, as if he were endeavouring to rouse me from a fixed delusion. And you may aim at what you like, but a gridiron it will come out, either by your leave or again your leave. And you can't help yourself, my dear Joe, I cried, in desperation, taking hold of his coat. Don't go on in that way. I never thought of making Miss Havisham any present. No, Pip, Joe assented, as if he had been contending for that, all along. And what I say to you is, you are right, Pip. Yes, Joe, but what I wanted to say, was, that as we are rather slack just now, if you would give me a half holiday tomorrow, I think I would go uptown and make a call on Miss Havisham. Which her name, said Joe, gravely, ain't Havisham, Pip. Unless she have been rechristened. I know, Joe, I know. It was a slip of mine. What do you think of it, Joe? In brief, Joe thought that if I thought well of it, he thought well of it. But he was particular in stipulating that if I were not received with cordiality, or if I were not encouraged to repeat my visit as a visit which had no ulterior object, but was simply one of gratitude for a favour received, then this experimental trip should have no successor. By these conditions I promised to abide. Now, Joe kept a journeyman at weekly wages whose name was Orlick. He pretended that his Christian name was Dolgy, a clear impossibility, but he was a fellow of that obstinate disposition that I believe him to have been the prey of no delusion in this particular, but wilfully to have imposed that name upon the village as an affront to its understanding. He was a broad-shouldered, loose-limbed, swarthy fellow of great strength, never in a hurry, and always slouching. He never even seemed to come to his work on purpose, but would slouch in as if by mere accident, and when he went to the Jolly Bargeman to eat his dinner, or went away at night, he would slouch out, like Cain or the Wandering Jew, as if he had no idea where he was going and no intention of ever coming back. He lodged at a sluice keeper's out on the marshes, and on working days would come slouching from his hermitage, with his hands in his pockets and his dinner loosely tied in a bundle round his neck and dangling on his back. On Sundays he mostly lay all day on the sluice gates, or stood against ricks and barns. He always slouched, locomotively, with his eyes on the ground, and, when accosted or otherwise required to raise them, he looked up in a half resentful, half puzzled way, as though the only thought he ever had was that it was rather an odd and injurious fact that he should never be thinking. This morose journeyman had no liking for me. When I was very small and timid, he gave me to understand that the devil lived in a black corner of the forge, and that he knew the fiend very well. Also that it was necessary to make up the fire, once in 7 years, with a live boy, and that I might consider myself fuel. When I became Joe's prentice, Orlick was perhaps confirmed in some suspicion that I should displace him, howbeit, he liked me still less. Not that he ever said anything, or did anything, openly importing hostility. I only noticed that he always beat his sparks in my direction, and that whenever I sang Old Clem, he came in out of time. Dolce Orlick was at work and present next day, when I reminded Joe of my half-holiday. He said nothing at the moment, for he and Joe had just got a piece of hot iron between them, and I was at the bellows. But by and by, he said, leaning on his hammer, "Now, master, sure you're not a-going to favour only one of us. If young Pip has a half-holiday, do as much for old Orlick." I suppose he was about 25, but he usually spoke of himself as an ancient person.